Welcome to the deep dive. Today, our focus is really zeroing in on the World Development Report 2024. We're pulling out the key ideas about how middle-income countries can make that really tough jump to high-income status.
Right. And our sources for this, they cover some crucial areas.
hmm
How economies actually change, the pressures they face globally, this idea of creative destruction, which is fascinating, why rewarding talent is so vital, and maybe surprisingly, how crises can actually be opportunities.
Exactly. And for you, the learner, the big question we're tackling is this. How can these middle-income countries realistically get out of that so-called middle-income trap and, build sustainable economic growth?
Yeah.
Okay, let's start there. This middle-income trap. What does it actually mean when we say a country gets stuck?
Well, think of it like hitting a plateau. A country grows, maybe based on manufacturing, maybe resources,
Hmm.
but then it just finds it incredibly hard to climb any higher, to become genuinely high income.
So it's not like they're doomed to stay there forever.
No, the report is clear on that. It's not inevitable, but it's a very real risk if policies don't adapt. You know,
Hmm.
the initial growth engine kind of sputters out, and you need something more sophisticated to take over.
And it sounds like the countries facing this today have, well, a tougher path than maybe others did in the past.
They really do face some serious headwinds.
Right.
The report points to rising debt levels across many developing economies. That really limits your ability to invest, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Then there's demographics, aging populations, which, okay, impacts your workforce, puts pressure on social safety nets. But the kicker is it's happening faster in today's middle-income countries.
Faster than it did for, say, Western Europe or Japan back in the day.
Exactly. Much faster.
Yeah.
Add to that growing protectionism in advanced economies, which closes off vital export markets. And, of course, the huge pressure for a rapid and expensive energy transition.
Wow. That's quite a list.
It makes sense, then, when the report notes that historically very few economies have actually managed that jump in the last, 30 years? Yeah, the track record isn't encouraging if you just look at the numbers. That's why the report boils it down to three core priorities if countries want to evade the trap.
Okay, what are they?
First, disciplining incumbency, basically dealing with powerful established players. Second, genuinely rewarding merit. And third, learning how to capitalize on crises to push reforms through.
Okay, disciplining incumbency, rewarding merit, capitalizing on crises. Let's dig into those. The report talks about strategic shifts,
Mm.
1I to 2I to 3I. What's that about?
Right, so think of it as stages. 1I is your basic strategy. Accelerate investment, build infrastructure, get factories going. Simple enough, right?
Okay, makes sense.
But then you need to move to 2I. That's investment plus infusion.
Infusion.
Yeah, infusion.
Yeah.
It means actively bringing in and spreading foreign technology and know-how. It's not just building the factory, it's learning the absolute best way to run it, using knowledge from elsewhere.
Ah, okay, so it's about getting smarter, leveraging global knowledge, not just throwing money at things.
Precisely. And then eventually the goal is to transition to 3I. Here, the focus shifts much more towards homegrown innovation, developing your own new technologies, your own solutions.
So investment, then infusion, then innovation.
Exactly. And underpinning all of this, the report stresses, is this delicate balance between creation, preservation, and destruction in the economy.
Creation, preservation, destruction. That sounds like a constant turn. What does that balance actually mean?
It means you need an environment where new, better businesses and ideas can sprout and grow. That's creation. But crucially, you also need a process where the older, less productive ones fade away or adapt. That's destruction.
And preservation, that sounds like the opposite.
Well, preservation refers to the forces to established companies, old regulations, vested interests that resist change and try to keep things as they are. You need to manage those forces so they don't block progress.
Got it. So it's about managing that tension. Does the report give examples of countries that manage this well?
Oh yeah, definitely. Chile, the Republic of Korea, Poland are highlighted as really interesting case studies.
Okay, let's take Korea. What was their secret sauce?
Korea's journey is pretty classic. They made a very conscious shift. First, they were all about infusion, actively copying and adapting foreign tech. They even had tax credits for paying royalties.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. But then they pivoted hard towards innovation. Massive investment in R&D, building up their own capacity, and crucially, they knew they needed a really skilled workforce to make it all happen.
Okay, a deliberate strategy. What about Chile? They're often seen as resource dependent.
Right, and they worked hard to diversify away from just mining. A big part of it was supporting smaller companies, SMEs, to get into exporting through agencies like ProChill.
Ah, helping the little guys go global.
Exactly. And they had this interesting organization, Fundación Chile, which actively brought in foreign tech. The salmon farming industry is a famous example. They basically adapted Norwegian techniques and became a world leader.
Wow, that's quite a specific intervention. And Poland?
Poland really highlights the benefits of integration. Joining the EU is obviously huge. It brought investment, access to markets, but also these positive spillovers, especially from R&D heavy sectors in other EU countries. It really boosted their whole economy.
Fascinating. Different paths, but all involving strategic choices. Now, the report also mentions shrinking spaces. What does that refer to?
Yeah, that's about the tougher global context today's middle-income countries are operating in.
Okay.
We're seeing more geopolitical friction, obviously. And worryingly, the report notes that harmful trade policies globally are actually outnumbering helpful ones.
So the ladder of exporting your way up is getting harder to climb?
It certainly seems that way. Add to that the debt burden we mentioned earlier, very high in many developing countries, makes borrowing expensive. And then there's climate action. Necessary, absolutely. But the required infrastructure investments, the regulatory changes, they cost a lot up front and could potentially slow down productivity gains in the short term. Plus, that faster aging population factor we talked about adds another layer of pressure.
It really does paint a picture of a more constrained world compared to, say, the late 20th century. Okay, let's shift gears to creative destruction. Sounds dramatic.
It is, but it's fundamental to long-term growth.
Right.
It's basically the process where outdated stuff, businesses, jobs, technologies, even old policies and ways of doing things, gets replaced by newer, more productive stuff.
So out with the old, in with the new. Where does the report say this new value comes from? Is it all startups?
Well, that's the interesting bit. The sort of traditional view, think Aguillon and Howitt, really emphasized new entrants, the startups shaking things up and displacing the old guard.
Right, the classic disruptive innovator.
Exactly. But a more modern take, highlighted by researchers like Exeget and Kerr, suggests it's actually both. Yes, new entrants are vital, but so are the established, often larger firms. They often have the resources, the scale, and frankly, most of the skilled workers in middle-income countries to adopt and infuse new knowledge effectively.
So you need both. The agile newcomers and the big players adapting and innovating.
Precisely. But here's the problem. The report finds that many middle-income countries lack this dynamism.
What does that look like?
Well, compare it to the U.S., where you tend to see an up or out dynamic for new firms. Either they grow fast or they often fail. In many middle-income countries, it's more flat and stay.
Flat and stay.
Yeah, businesses, especially smaller ones, often just stay the same size for years, often stuck in the informal sector. It suggests something's holding them back. High regulatory costs, for instance, can make it really unattractive for a small firm to formalize and try to scale up.
So these blockages prevent resources, capital, talent from moving to the more productive firms.
Exactly. It hampers both the creation of truly new, innovative firms and the infusion of better technologies into existing ones. It's inefficient.
Which leads us nicely into disciplining incumbency. Who are these incumbents?
Okay, so incumbents here refers to the powerful players who often benefit from the status quo and might resist change. Think large corporations, yes, but also state-owned enterprises, maybe powerful family dynasties, elites, often, though not always, men in positions of influence.
And how do they stand in the way?
They can use their market power to block new competitors. They might influence policy capture to protect their interests. They might resist changes in education or labor rules that could challenge their position. It's about preserving their advantage.
So the system gets skewed towards protecting the established players.
That's the risk. The report really stresses the need for good competition policy rules that encourage new entrants, but don't unfairly punish large firms that are actually productive and innovative. It notes, quite worryingly, that many middle-income countries have very restrictive regulations on the books for product markets.
And state-owned enterprises, SOEs, you mentioned them, are they a big factor?
A very significant one, especially in the BRICS and other large middle-income economies. Now, SOEs can serve public goals, but their sheer dominance in some sectors can definitely stifle competition and slow down innovation.
Any examples?
Well, the report mentions research suggesting market leaders in Italy sometimes focus more on political connections than R&D. And you hear anecdotes, or more than anecdotes, of SOEs in the energy sector, perhaps blocking the entry of cheaper renewable energy because it threatens their existing fossil fuel businesses.
Right, so how do you actually discipline them? What can be done?
The core idea is creating contestable markets, making it easier for new players to challenge the old ones.
Oh,
Through policies that, one, weaken those preservation forces like retracting special protections for incumbents, including SOEs, and ditching outdated regulations. Two, strengthen the creation forces, making it easier to start and grow a business. And three, sometimes directly targeting harmful incumbent practices.
so things like simplifying rules, ensuring everyone gets fair access to essential infrastructure, maybe opening up markets like electricity to more players.
Exactly. Less restrictive product market regulations, open access to infrastructure, competitive energy markets, those are key. And importantly, the report also links this to tackling social norms. Weakening entrenched patriarchal norms, for instance, is crucial for getting more women into the workforce, though obviously how that plays out varies a lot country by country.
That makes total sense. You can't reach your potential if half the population faces extra barriers. Okay, moving to rewarding merit. This sounds like building a fairer system.
Yes, but it's more specific than just general fairness. The report argues for shifting the policy focus away from just, say, tweaking income distribution after the fact toward boosting mobility, social and economic, and making sure talent goes where it can be most productive.
So it's about opportunity and efficiency.
Exactly. Rewarding merit in sort of three domains: the upward journey of people, the value added by firms, and interestingly, performance on reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, what's foundational to making that happen? Where do you start?
Foundational skills. Basic literacy, numeracy, but also socio-emotional skills. The report shows that countries that made the leap successfully, like Finland and Chile in its earlier reforms, really prioritize getting these basics right for everyone.
So good basic education is step one. What else?
Tackling inequality of opportunity head-on. This stems from norms like gender bias we just discussed, but also networks, who your family knows, and neighborhoods are like the huge disparities in access to good schools, healthcare, safety, depending on where you grew up.
The postcode lottery idea.
Pretty much. High inequality is consistently linked to low intergenerational mobility. Basically, if you're born poor, it's much harder to escape poverty. Things like living in slums, limited ability to move within the country for work, especially for the less educated, gender gaps in schooling and jobs, these are all barriers to meritocracy.
So dismantling those systemic barriers is crucial. What about higher up the chain? Higher education R&D.
Quality across the board in higher education is key, not just in a few elite universities. The report mentions interesting ideas like Brazil's quotas or Texas's top 10% rule to try and broaden access beyond just exam scores.
Holistic admission, kind of?
Sort of. And supporting your top talent, too, through special programs. Then there's R&D, strategic public funding, allocated competitively, especially in STEM, health, the energy transition like Pakistan's Science Foundation, and really fostering those links between universities and industry. Tax breaks, clear rules, tech transfer offices like at Unicamp in Brazil or Shimolegang in South Africa, getting knowledge out of the lab and into the economy.
And for businesses, how do you reward merit there?
It comes back to that dynamism idea. Let the productive firms grow. Allow them to attract resources, even if it means less productive firms shrink or exit. Avoid just propping up all small firms regardless of potential, as that can actually trap resources.
So support potential, not just size or incumbency.
Exactly. And connect entrepreneurs to what they need: finance, mentors, markets. Address the fact that banks are often wary of lending to new ventures without collateral. Things like better equity markets, making it less personally devastating if a business fails, are important. Business accelerators can also play a role here. There's growing evidence they help.
It really is a comprehensive picture, from basic skills right up to high-tech finance. Okay, finally, capitalizing on crises. Sounds a bit opportunistic, but I get the logic.
It does sound that way.
Yeah.
But the idea is that crises, economic shocks, political turmoil, even huge ecological challenges like climate change, they can shake things up.
Right.
They weaken the forces that normally resist change, the preservation forces we talked about. This can open up windows for reforms that were maybe politically stuck before.
And the current climate crisis, the energy transition, the report sees this as a major potential window.
Absolutely. A huge one. It's a chance to deliberately steer investment, technology adoption, that infusion piece, and innovation towards decarbonization.
How can that help middle-income countries specifically?
Well, many low-carbon technologies, think wind, solar, EVs, have increasing returns to scale. The more you make, the cheaper it gets. This creates real opportunities for middle-income countries to become major producers of these green goods and services, or components for them.
So tackling a global problem becomes an engine for their own growth.
That's the potential. But, and it's a big but, it requires the right conditions. A good investment climate domestically is crucial. And really importantly, the report calls on high-income countries, the G20 and OECD, to back off from protectionist green industrial policies that could actually just fragment the global market and slow everyone's transition down.
So we need global cooperation, not a green trade war.
Right? Exactly. Global coordination is key. The report also digs into whether investing in renewables makes economic sense in these countries.
And does it?
Often, yes. Comparing the social returns, it's frequently efficient to expand renewables. But there are hurdles. The cost of capital for these projects is often much higher in lower and middle-income countries.
So financing is a barrier.
A major one. That needs addressing, along with other barriers for investors, both local and foreign. And again, you have to discipline incumbents, those energy SOEs, blocking renewables. You need to reward merit in energy, like using a merit order system that prioritizes the cheapest power first, which is often renewables since their fuel cost is zero.
What about policy tools?
The usual suspects are mentioned. Carbon pricing, phasing out fossil fuel subsidies definitely, helping people adopt energy efficiency, finding ways to lower that cost of capital for green energy, boosting multilateral finance. It's interesting the report notes high-income countries cut emissions mostly by using less energy per unit of GDP.
Becoming more efficient.
Right. Whereas in middle-income countries, emissions growth is still tightly linked to just overall economic growth.
So the big challenge for them is breaking that link, decoupling growth from emissions.
That's the crux of it. Finding green growth pathways.
Well, this has been a really fascinating deep dive into the World Development Report 2024. If I were to sum it up, it feels like the path from middle to high income isn't guaranteed at all. It really requires these very deliberate strategic shifts, embracing technology, fostering real competition, properly rewarding talent, and maybe even using global challenges like climate change as a catalyst.
I think that's a great summary. And the key takeaway for you, the learner, is probably that escaping this middle income trap isn't about luck or destiny. It really comes down to governments making proactive, sometimes difficult policy choices, choosing dynamism and efficiency over just sticking with what's comfortable or known.
Right. Maybe a final thought to leave everyone with. Given how interconnected our world is, how might the success or failure of these middle-income countries in making this transition actually reshape the global economic landscape for all of us, no matter where we live? And perhaps more personally, how can staying curious, continuing to learn about these big shifts, help you navigate the changes ahead? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.